The various feudal lords of Ireland were discontent by the legal authority of the king and the centralized nature of the monarchy's governance. Their grievances were largely inconsequential to the royal family, as they held so much military might that any rebellion was short-lived. As such, Ireland historically enjoyed large stretches of domestic stability. However, the expansions into England tipped the balance of power. As the monarchy could not control the vast kingdom, they delegated more and more power to vassals over the course of the English conquests. These vassals, who now had strong duchies, started forming into powerful factions in an effort to force the king to relinquish some of his powers or even to dislodge the Irish from their conquered lands. Growing tensions eventually reached their breaking point after the death of King Loingsech the Cruel. To try and unite the realm under his new rule, King Coldub directed forces to continue the subjugation of the last remaining independent English counties. He thought the flames of war could give the realm a common goal, but he was mistaken. The Grand Mayor of Mercia and most of the kingdom's dukes gave the king an ultimatum. The Kingdom of Ireland should turn into an elective monarchy so feudal lords can have some say in the future of the kingdom. If not, they would wage the largest civil war in Irish history, or at least to that point. King Coldub realized a change in inheritance law could see the kingdoms of England, Wales, Brittany, and Ireland break away from each other under different elected kings. Wanting to preserve all that his family had worked towards, he refused and war had begun. The forces of the rebellion greatly outnumbered Coldub's. Bands of loyal men gathered at the capital offering to help, but even so the war would be difficult. The king sent his troops to North Wales, where they were to assume a defensive posture and use the country's hills to their advantage. There, the rebels' 14,000 men force attacked the roughly 10,000 strong Irish. The rebels had no military command and were driven to retreat. This victory gave confidence to Coldub, who had doubts about victory. No more. King Coldub was determined to restore peace to Ireland and preserve the strength of the monarchy. The rebellion would eventually create some military leadership, which continued to attack the entrenched Irish forces again and again. They were defeated over and over, but every attack chipped away at Coldub's forces. The rebellion called for a white peace. The monarchy would stay hereditary, but the traitorous dukes would be spared imprisonment and execution. Coldub refused. Afterwards, the rebellion attacked once again, finally breaking the Irish defenses and inflicting heavy casualties. The king was forced to employ the costly services of mercenaries, hoping to now outnumber the rebels. He went on the offensive, won a decisive victory, and then mysteriously fell off of a balcony. The kingdom then passed to the 8-year-old King Colum, with his mother acting as regent. The war continued. Seeing an opportunity to prey on Irish weakness, the King of Scotland invaded rebel territory. This outside invasion, and the general stalemate, forced the rebellion to once again ask for a white peace. King Colum, like his father, declined. The Irish then suffered a devastating loss, causing the king to ask for white peace. Seeing the Irish realms were now united, Scotland withdrew their forces. It was not the peace anyone wanted, but it would keep the kingdom intact, or at least it would for about a week, as the white peace was immediately followed up by a new, although much smaller rebellion. Colum's troops were putting up a good fight, but the now 12-year-old boy decided to follow his father's footsteps and mysteriously fell off of a balcony, dying. Ireland was passed to his brother, King Loingsech. The new child king would eventually emerge victorious, finally imprisoning the rebelling dukes. Loingsech wished to restore the balance of power between the nobility and the monarchy. After successfully surviving childhood, he gained the full rights of a king and sought about achieving his goal through further centralization. He believed that antagonistic factions would rise regardless of any changes to the kingdom's laws, so what needed to be done instead was the reduction of the number of vassals conspiring against him. He still needed vassals to rule the realms that he could not, so the king sought to combine duchies under single dukes. The individual dukes would be more powerful as a result, but would still need a faction to pose a serious challenge. These factions would be harder for vassals to start with fewer potential allies, and also easier for the king to dissolve. Of course, some dukes would have to be removed in order for their duchies to be granted to someone else. The heretical Cathar Duke of Huys could be easily removed if the king claimed to be trying to protect Catholicism. The duke was to be imprisoned, but escaped to lead a small independence rebellion. Inspired by the duke's resistance, another large-scale rebellion erupted, trying once again to establish an elective monarchy. The king was actually happier this way. With the majority of dukes turning traitors, it would be easier to revoke their titles. He was confident of an eventual victory, but would go on to suffer the loss of half his army after a tragic defeat. He realized he would need assistance if the war was to be won, and so set about creating alliances. The king somewhat despised the continent, as he believed his grandfather's trivial war for France begat the strife within Ireland. The various events in Europe were a distraction from his family's ultimate goal, the domination of the British Isles. Alas, He needed their help if that dream were to ever become a reality. Frisius sent massive amounts of troops, which eventually joined with the Irish army to mercilessly destroy the rebellion. King Mac Lézére imprisoned the rebels. He then redistributed their lands. With a newly organized realm, the king was then able to pass laws granting even more power to the monarchy. The power of the king was now absolute. With his vassals finally subdued, the king invaded the last remaining independent English county. Suffolk fell, and the Kingdom of Ireland began to experience the longest stretch of peace and stability in decades. Now, there was only one thing left standing in the way of King Mac Lézére's and the Horning dynasty's ultimate ambition: to create an Irish empire fully dominating the Isles. Scotland would have to be conquered. The legal justification for such a move would be hard to find, but the king had a plan.